I'm Carol Cohn, and welcome to Purpose 360, the podcast that unlocks the power of purpose to ignite business and social impact. Today's guest is someone I quite literally chased down after hearing him at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's Business Solves Conference in Washington, D.C. last fall. Brendan McCluskey, president of Trident Builders, shared such a provocative story about rebuilding distressed communities through distinctive collaboration that I knew he must share it with our listeners on Purpose 360. In this conversation, Brendan discusses a bold and deeply thoughtful approach for housing that gets to the heart of community, equity, and economic opportunity. We talk about building affordable homes, workforce development, breaking the cycle of poverty, and what it really means for businesses, not-for-profits, and government to work together in innovative collaborations to solve complex, interconnected challenges. In this conversation, Brendan takes us inside Baltimore, sharing its housing challenges, its workforce gaps, and its untapped potential. And he discusses how he's connecting the dots between construction, community development, and economic mobility. If you're interested in how purpose-driven leadership can turn complex urban challenges into scalable, practical solutions, this is a conversation about one man's vision, his wonderful heart, and perseverance. And certainly Brendan's collaborative model is one that I trust will inspire you to replicate in your work. The key magic unlock here is collaboration and letting your mind stretch to bring innovative partnerships together. So let's get started. Welcome to the show, Brendan McCluskey, president of Trident Builders.
Hi, Carol. Thank you for having us. I'm flattered to be on this presentation with you.
Well, we're going to have a great conversation about dealing with key community problems regarding housing and poverty and jobs and women and small businesses and how organizations can work together in a unique model that supports your purpose. And I love on your website that you say that Trident constructs buildings as a matter of practice, but helps build communities with equal dedication.
Absolutely.
So as we start, talk a little bit about who is Brendan McCluskey, a little bit about your background, and then we're going to start getting into the depth of our conversation.
All right, fantastic. Well, again, thank you, Carol. My name is Brendan McCluskey. I'm the founder of Trident Builders. We are a commercial general contractor located in Baltimore, Maryland. We do work that really kind of spans the spectrum. Federal work, private sector work, a lot of very technically sophisticated projects, and doing an awful lot of design assist or design build work, where we kind of are helping shape the vision of the project based upon like the business like functions and like performance requirements of it, or it's or the performance side of things. I've been very blessed to work at some of the best construction and development firms in the country. I started my career in the base building division of HIT Contracting, which is a multi-billion-dollar national construction firm. It was building high-rises and skyscrapers and biotech campuses with them. From there, I did a stint in multifamily, and then I worked for the related companies out in Colorado, doing 5-star amenities on top of Snowmass Mountain. And I just really benefited from working for some very sophisticated subcontractors. General contractors and developers. In 2015, I decided that it was time for me to strike it out on my own. And I founded Trident Builders, again, to be just a commercial general contractor here in the great city of Baltimore. And it's been an interesting experience. I can tell you that it's been a slog. It's been interesting, but I think that over time, I spent more and more time looking at the problems that Baltimore City had and cities like Baltimore, and thought that, what does it mean to be a builder? Why am I doing this? And why are we in business? And, what sort of positive change can we affect in the world that we see? Like, how can we be that agent of change? And that's what we do.
I always love to ask my guests, was there something in your upbringing from your mother, your father, your family that contributed to your exploration and then actual work that is beyond building a structure, but it's building community as well?
I would definitely say so. I was blessed to have two great parents, high school sweethearts from Massachusetts. One of the things that you learn in an Irish Catholic Navy family is that it's your fault, it is your responsibility to fix the problem. And just having sort of a resolutely focus on figuring out what the solution is to anything. If there's a problem, it's your responsibility to figure it out. And I feel as if those are qualities that I definitely absorbed from my father, who was a captain in the Navy.
Oh, nice. And anything special from your mother?
To be kind. I definitely would say that my mother, there was a degree of kindness and, and tenderness that my mother offered, and just and being appreciative of how the other half might live. Again, having the opportunity to be a kid living overseas and seeing how people in other countries are growing and some of the challenges that they're grappling with was a humbling experience as youth. And so I think my mom was quick to point out how lucky and blessed that I am.
So you've taken that, I think, depth of heart and commitment to Baltimore. And so why are you so fiercely proud of Baltimore?
I'm very bullish on Baltimore. I mean, it's a phenomenal city and it has just tremendous assets. It's got incredible intellectual and financial capital, right? It's got a great legacy, especially within the industry. It's been so critical in the formation and the growth of this, economic juggernaut that we call the United States. A lot of people don't realize that the rail system was founded here, right? We are the westernmost port on the East Coast. We have just tremendous amount of assets, and we really were the opening window for the Industrial Revolution here in the United States. It's got so many things going for it. It's in an exceptionally wealthy state, an exceptionally well-educated state, but the concentration of poverty is just something that just can't be overlooked. And I really feel as if Baltimore is the one city on the East Coast that really hasn't figured out its second act yet. And I think that we're on the precipice of doing so.
So you were founded in 2015, and in the beginning you were just doing general construction and such. I don't think that you were quite into the community development that you're in. You've said that, you were chasing dollars early on, trying to keep the lights on. But then what did that time begin to teach you about there's a difference between revenue and creating sustainable systems?
No, that's a great question. So I quit my job on April Fool's Day, 2015. And,
Okay.
it was, the verdict was out for several years, whether or not this was a good idea or not. But that same month, though, Baltimore was actually hit with quite a tragedy. So, I quit my job on the 1st. All right. So my last day was 2 weeks later. So it was really Monday the 13th that I started up business operations. That was quite a thankful week here in Maryland, and in Baltimore in particular, because that was the week that Freddie Gray got arrested and then died. So when I started my company, I had an eyeball at about $6 million worth of opportunity, with the humble expectation that if I captured, say, $2 million of it as a first year startup, I would be, smooth sailing. All of it vaporized, right, in the aftermath of Freddie Gray. And I didn't have any sort of disdain about what was going on in Baltimore. It was just a really frustrating situation that I had to very quickly learn to get out there and, find new work, right? And also by being entrepreneurial in a startup, it's pretty gritty. So I had to learn how to hunt, kill, cook, and clean all on my own very, very quickly, and had to deal with all new client acquisitions, things that I had not kind of cultivated before I made my exit. I had to do from scratch. And that made for a very, very hard first few years. In the first couple of years, because I had been so blessed to build all kinds of different things, I really had the ability to kind of build anything. But what I found was that there was a challenge there in terms of lacking specialization and optimization, right, within, say, the market sector, that margins were often compressed as a result of that. So what I've really kind of learned in the last 10 years, that it's really about focusing on where can you develop a sustainable competitive advantage? Where can you just outshine over your competitors? And then how do you do that and maximize margin? It's not necessarily about maximizing revenue. It's about maximizing margin.
So that's a great lead into, you were part of Goldman Sachs 10,000 small businesses. And I'm just, when did you go through that? And did that experience help you to begin to like focus on specialization where you could build reputation, capability, and margins?
100%. Yeah. It was a transformative experience. So it's kind of funny. I went through the program, kind of begrudgingly, thinking that like this is a waste of time. I got to go put out the fires out in the business, and I couldn't have been any more wrong. What it afforded me the ability to do is to start thinking strategically again. So when any small business that is struggling, right? Sometimes you can feel like you're in a tactical firefight and you're just like trying to survive the day. You're trying to figure out how am I going to make payroll? How am I going to pay this? How am I going to do that? The program basically forces everybody to kind of look underneath the hood of their business and identify what's working well and what's not working well. Some people akin it to like a mini MBA. It isn't. It's actually much better than that. And it's really kind of a scaling program for high potential growth companies. And for me, again, it allowed me the space. Like I knew how to read financial statements. I knew how to, execute in the field and actually the services very, very well. I had enough background in HR and everything else. Like we were fine. It forced me to do is take a step back. It's like, okay, what are we really good at? What are we not so good at? What are we making money at? Let's do more of the latter and less of the things that we're struggling on. And since then, I've been really constantly reapplying where can I affect positive change? Where can I be strategic and just have an outsized impact based upon what it is we're already doing? And that kind of led to the white paper and the presentation that you met over.
That's a perfect bridge to the presentation that you made in DC at the chamber. So I'd love you to talk about the entire initiative, how it started. You probably had a eureka. I want to do this. I'm going to solve these problems, and really talk about the depth. So first of all, I've seen different names of this initiative. So is there a formal name for this initiative?
Now we're calling it the BMore Co-op. The genesis of this really kind of started in the fall of 2019. I had been invited to the Bloomberg School of Public Health to go to a workforce development program. And it was just funny because on my way, as I was driving over, I had two fateful phone calls. One with a friend of mine through the Urban Land Institute who had been asking me about modular construction. And me being like the construction nerd that I am, I did some reading and research on it. And like I was, talking to her about, the benefits and the shortfalls of modular construction. Then I had a phone call from a developer client of mine that was interested in like a lease to own program called the Cleveland Housing Network that Enterprise was doing in Cleveland, where it was helping people escape the cycle of rentals and low-income housing tax credits. It was basically graduating them into home ownership. Okay, so those are two phone calls, and then I literally walk into a room at the Bloomberg School of Public Health thinking that we're going to be talking about apprenticeship programs. We were talking about anything but. We were talking about food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation issues, trauma, criminal justice, like all these things that these young men in particular, but also women, get kind of knocked off the rails and like basically are prevented from being able to pursue good opportunities to be able to provide for themselves. So like there's a lot of like risk and adversity to these kids. Like right or wrong, I'm not being politically agnostic or one or the other. It's just like these are factual realities that these kids are having to navigate. And in the course of that meeting, I was just kind of like thinking of it, and it looked more and more like a football play, right? There's no Superman or a Wonder Woman that's going to solve poverty in Baltimore, right? But me as Trident Builders, right, I can, cover the left side like a linebacker, right? I can tackle housing insecurity and workforce development. Other people can figure out other small business sort of activities to address other sort of issues. And like that, we just need to work in tandem in communication. And so what ended up happening was, we started like working to scale a solution that addressed the vacants, but also kind of help spur the investment and the capture of a nascent industry and help scale modular construction, but also doing it in a way that was thoughtful regarding like energy needs, as well as workforce development programs and everything else.
I want to start with vacants because I don't think our listeners know what a vacant is.
Okay, yeah. So a vacant is basically the remnants of a house that is no longer habitable, right? So Baltimore grew very, very rapidly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as like the industrial boom was happening. These houses were built to support that industrial worker base, right? So these are, 16 foot wide, 45 foot deep, red brick homes. They're literally just row homes next to each other. A lot of them were built without any sort of material science in them. So these are houses that have kind of deteriorated over the last 100 years. So they don't have, like, we find like oyster shells and horsehair in like the mortar mix, right? These houses lack really any sort of insulation for the most part. And basically what ends up happening is, they're houses that were built very cheaply 100 years ago, and they're frankly falling apart. I mean, they don't have like longevity to be a home that can last another century or two. Some of them can be restored, and I do believe in that. I believe in historic preservation where it makes sense. But again, I think a lot of what it is we're dealing with is the legacy of our industrial past. And we have all this housing stock that has fallen apart and honestly is directly a contributor to poor health outcomes for its residents. I mean, these houses are literally killing people. Never mind that they're burning down, but like the existence of these houses basically suppress socioeconomic opportunity in these neighborhoods. And and once they become uninhabited, they become vectors for criminal activity, particularly the drug trade. So these houses are literally like a cancer in the city. And if we don't address the houses, we're not going to be able to let Baltimore thrive to its full potential.
Talk about your model. So there are 5 problems in your presentation that you talked about. One, you're going to deal with the vacants, but there's other parts and problems.
It does start with a vacant. So again, we have this vast number of vacants, right? And we have a math problem. We can't spend $300,000 to $400,000 renovating one of these houses, abating like the lead and the asbestos and getting the energy efficiency performance to where it needs to be to survive a hotter century to come, and then have it only worth $250 at the end, right? So I've been resolutely focused on where is there potential innovation for my industry. And that actually bodes to another problem, is that my industry is actually regressing in terms of our relative productivity. Yeah, per McKinsey and even like The Economist, our industry is less efficient and productive now than it was in 1968. And it's kind of an astounding statement to make when you think about like how the advent of information technology has transformed just about everything. But between the regulatory environment, an aging workforce, and then the higher performance requirements, we just can't produce and be as productive as we were, half a century ago. And so what I've been really kind of resolutely focused on is like, how do we start doing this in a way that helps us scale the industrial capacity to make modular more cost effective than conventional construction, and then do that in an open and equitable way. The way to do that is honestly be open source. So like, a lot of people could be somewhat stingy, right? And like hoard their knowledge and their know-how. And I'm just looking at the size and the scale of the problem. And like, this is way too big for even just Trident Builders. So like, how do we do this in a way that makes sure that even my competitors, as low as I want to say that out loud, how can I empower them to do this in a way that they're also successful? Again, it's both practical and pragmatic to take that sort of approach because, again, the size and scale of the problem is way larger than Trident Builders can handle on their own. It needs to be done faster than that. But I also need to make sure that like my competitors don't mess it up, because if they're
Okay.
right, well, because like, I mean, if the margin for error in high performance housing, like there could be bad outcomes. And my concern is that if people are out there like jokers really, and like getting this all messed up, it could put a stink on what it is we're trying to do and make it harder. And like, I really want to make sure that we're doing this in an open source and equitable way that, basically reduces risk to everybody involved and encourages adoption.
And I love you're talking a lot of emphasis on equity, because one of your elements, your key audiences to make this work are small scale developers. And you say that many of them are either people of color or women. So you're providing opportunities for their businesses to grow. That was one audience that was really important. And then I want you to talk about unemployed youth, because you say that, because they're not educated enough or skilled enough to go into an apprenticeship. But as I think you said in your speech, they're all over. They're sitting on stoops. They're getting into trouble or whatever. So how did you have that aha moment? Let's get these unemployed youth. Let's train them and give them an opportunity for a future.
So first, start with the smaller scale developers. Again, it's pragmatism, Carol, right? I mean, yes, it's the right thing to do, but it's also like the right thing to do in terms of like execution. A lot of these communities have women-based community leaders in them, right? And they're the ones that are spearheading the development efforts. They know an awful lot. Like, one of my clients is a PhD. She's brilliant. But they know very little about real estate development and construction. And this is where they get into trouble because they sometimes come across contractors that might not necessarily have like their best interests at heart and not necessarily be as mission-centric as Trident Builders. So these are minority developers, predominantly women, that have site control of housing assets within these communities. They're from the communities, they live in the communities, they're trusted by the communities, right? These communities are somewhat cagey, right? They've been like taken advantage of time and time again by any number of people. So it's really hard for a guy like me to kind of come in there and be like, oh, I'm going to redevelop this community for you. By empowering them, we're building at a scale that neighborhood can absorb, but then we're also keeping the wealth in that community.
Great. So talk about the unemployed youth, because you have when you talk about it and you look at your website, you have a really deep commitment to helping youth get off the stoop and to have a future.
Yeah, well, especially here in Baltimore, like we have a sick irony. We have a shortage of construction workers, but then we have all these underemployed youth. And like these underemployed youth have been failed by institutions their entire lives, right? Chief among them, probably the schools. And they don't have the academic rigor to get past the apprenticeship programs. Now, this is where it gets a little bit convoluted. So apprenticeship programs in the construction industry are usually focused on the skilled trades. So electrical, plumbing, HVAC, fire sprinkler. And those are kind of dictated by a combination of basically open job as well as union sort of like labor negotiations and like what the definition of what those programs look like. There's a middle gap that we're missing, all right? And that is the semi-skilled laborer, right? And that's
semi-skilled, yeah.
Well, and trust me, a drywall finisher that is good is worth his weight in gold, right? But like for whatever reason, we don't call them a skilled laborer, we call them semi-skilled. And what we have a shortage of is those workers. So the average age of a construction worker in this country right now is like 43 years old. 1 in 4 construction workers is over the age of 55. So we actually have a demographic like crisis that no one's really talking about. At the same time, we have all these underemployed youth in a city like Baltimore. There's other competing situations, and these kids have a lot of other life factors that we can't explore everything here. But that's where I kind of became resolutely focused, in which we it's like, no, we got to figure out ways to start like funneling these kids back into the formal economy, and that's what we've been doing.
That's great. So, and you actually, I love to quote you. You say that these kids, if they don't have an opportunity, they express their fear with anger. And that's where you have perhaps some street fights, or we might have fires or other things. So it's great that you're that you're providing an opportunity. Talk a little bit about working with a modular manufacturer, because that was a problem. They want to work on a large scale, but you were working on a small scale. How did you get over that barrier?
But the thing is, with like anything in a factory, right? Like you need to achieve certain degrees of economies of scale. And you can't do that doing 4, 5, 10 units at a time. Like really to make the metrics work, where you start to beat out on the conventional construction model, you need to start getting into 30, 40, 50 units at a time. What we decided to do is we started thinking about all of these smaller scale developers that are scattered all over the city. What if we could crowdsource their aggregate demand to hit that threshold? So all of a sudden, like they start achieving like the buying power in aggregate. That co-op now is a real entity, and I founded it last August with a professor at Hopkins, as well as some other for-profit and nonprofit developers, all alumni from the Goldman Sachs program. And there's a lot of interesting things that are happening very, very quickly.
Oh, that's great. How do you select the right partners for collaboration? I mean, yes, you had you had some buds that you met at the Goldman Sachs program, but you're working with a lot of other different organizations. Collaboration is key. Collaboration is so important, especially for improving our communities. How do you choose the right ones?
I've been working with the Carey School of Business at Johns Hopkins in a think tank called like the BMore Co-op, where you had a lot of like mission-centric people, a lot of these ideal sort of developer customers of mine were in the meeting. And we zeroed in on this small group. And I really did focus on the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program, simply because of a few things. One, these individuals have already been vetted by a world-class organization like Goldman Sachs. Two, they've got a modicum of phenomenal business education by virtue of going through the program. So I know that like they should know better in terms of business decisions, depending upon when we have issues, right? And then lastly, we're kind of like a family, like I think when you're a small business owner, it's kind of lonely. Like, you don't have too many peers. And I feel as if like the Goldman Sachs program has done a phenomenal job of building like a national peer group. And we kind of rely and trust on each other. And we don't really ever want to go against the family.
All right. So you dealt with the modular issue. That was a big challenge. You're dealing with great partners. So you're learning there. We have not talked about one of the magical elements, solar. So can you talk about how you're using solar and how it's generating income? And also how it creates longevity, because I think that that is another genius part of your solution.
This is where it gets interesting. So the modular construction allows us to build a very high performance building envelope, literally the outside walls. That's where we win the battle between energy efficiency. So first, we're building a new house, a quality house that is hyper energy efficient, that reduces the operation expenses of like an energy bill for these families of modest means, right? What we discovered at the Smithsonian was that when we put solar panels on them, these houses were producing over 200% of the power they were using day or night, 365. And so what we were seeing was like, okay, these houses can produce a lot of energy when energy is the most expensive. How do we harness this? And like, there's a lot of nuance to why solar has not been widely adopted within these communities. Like, just call it what it is. Solar developers back in the day were somewhat predatory. So a lot of people have like a bad taste when it comes to solar about, leases and how they get hogtied into like these rooftop leases. What we basically determined is like, we build a new house. That house is going to have a roof that's going to be good for 15 to 20 years. It just so happens that solar panels are good for 15 to 20 years. So what we're doing is we're basically optimizing the roof to be leased to third-party solar developers that are responsible for the roof. So a vacant becomes a vacant because these families of modest means can't afford to replace the roof when it starts to go. So we're giving them a new house with a new roof. We're bringing on a lease for a solar developer to put solar panels on top of it. These leases have options to renew. And basically, the provision within that lease is going to require the solar developer to replace the roof at that time, right? In the event that the solar developer doesn't want to renew the lease and like do the capital investment, it's fine. We even set aside an escrow, a royalty, like a portion of the proceeds of the leasing to basically allow for the roof's replacement. But the beautiful thing is that I have, knowing with what energy trends are looking like, any sort of generation capacity we put online, it's not going offline, right? It's going to be even worth even more down the road. So what ends up happening is that rainy day fund, or that emergency reserve to replace that roof when it needs to in 15 to 20 years, then becomes a windfall event for that family. And so you inadvertently are starting to close the social wealth gap just by virtue of the sun shining.
I love it. That again, it's another part of your brilliant. It's like putting all these different layers and components together to really create a breakthrough solution. Can you talk about one or two of your new projects? You've got one, I think, that's creating 100 units that's coming up.
So we have a 3-story row home, something that is ubiquitous in Baltimore that everyone would recognize and be comfortable with seeing. The first floor is designed for the elderly and the disabled in mind. So it's going to be ADA ready, if not compliant. And that will allow like a sorely missing part of the housing market for the elderly, which is a growing demographic that we need a lot of housing for, to allow them to age in place longer. So it defers like a lot of the end of life costs and assisted living and whatnot as long as we possibly can. The upper 2 floors are designed for a working-class family. Now, this family could be all related to each other. It could be 2 separate families. We're agnostic to it. Like the idea is to allow the market to do what the market wants to do, right? Let the market operate freely. Again, I'm very much a free market believer, right? And but I believe that we need to bring better products to the free market than what we're currently doing. And then lastly, what's really cool is the Tivoli Eco Village, which we've been awarded pre-construction on. So that's 100 units and so it's a whole neighborhood development. And what's cool about that is that it's going to be incorporating microgrid technology. So on top of solar, we're going to be doing battery backup storage and other sort of resiliency sort of technologies. Why that's important is that our national grid is also under huge strain and like the growth demand, right? I mean, I've been pretty vocal about like how aggressive our year over year growth of energy generation demand and capacity is like doubling every year right now. So what we're doing is we're basically building a small neighborhood that is going to be resilient. So if there was ever like a catastrophic failure of the grid, this little neighborhood would act as an oasis within Baltimore, right? But like the thing is, like we want to build everything like this. We want to build like a whole Patrick. And this is how you engineered resiliency into the grid for the 21st century.
That's amazing. So what advice would you give to young people who want to go into construction, but they want to go into sustainable construction?
Young people that want to go into construction, definitely focus on the engineering degrees, but it's not necessary. Learn as much as you possibly can, because again, where I think the real places of innovation and where I think the industry is going is the human mind's ability to connect dots across various disciplines. I think that's where I think the greatest degree of innovation, we're going to see moving forward in construction and really across the economy, is our ability to connect dots from things that seem very disconnected. And again, I would, be humble, get out there, get dirty, and just be open-minded.
And are you using AI in terms of, I know that you're a data gatherer because you want to share it with others. Are you using AI in your work?
We are. What we're doing is we're basically putting in our systems and our practices with artificial intelligence to do, 100, 200 of the same thing over and over. It's really ideal for machine learning. So what we're basically looking to do is basically engineer up a virtual project management agent and or superintendent agent that what we'll do is it will drive all sorts of efficiencies and productivity issues and basically minimize what I would call cost leakage that happens on the job site through lack of communication and documentation.
Fabulous. So we like to end our show with some fast answers, really brief. So we're going to put you through these. So what's the one word that best describes the Baltimore you're working to help build? One word.
Resolve.
Resolve. Okay. What keeps you hopeful on the days this work feels really hard?
There's not a day that doesn't feel really hard. Hope is the only thing that's getting me through it.
What's one lesson Baltimore has taught you about resilience or community that you couldn't have learned anywhere else?
I think I described how it was hard getting started and how I kind of got 2 black eyes and a bloody nose in this first couple of years, right? But walking around these neighborhoods, you see how much harder some of these communities have faced than any of the minor tribulations that I faced with. So, maybe it's the Catholicism rubbing off again, where it's just shut about your problems and focus on helping somebody else.
What's one small action people can take to make their communities more equitable today?
Examine where your skill sets are and just find somewhere where you help just a person. And it could be a complete stranger. In fact, sometimes those are the best people to help.
And if you could leave our listeners with one idea or feeling today of what we discussed, what would it be?
Carol, to be perfectly honest with you, don't get me wrong. I sometimes feel as if I'm a Don Quixote out here. I feel as if I'm a crazy man, try to tackle climate change, housing, poverty, energy, all of it, right? And one's ego can make them concerned that they're going to look foolish. Who cares, right? Who really cares? Get out there, roll up your sleeves, and just work a problem. Don't let pride get in your way. Just focus on what is the right thing to do and how can you be the change that you want to see in the world.
That's beautiful. So I always love to give the last word to our guest. And you've had phenomenal insights and sharing with great humility, Brendan. What would you like to leave our listeners with?
You only get what you give.
You only get what you give. Brilliant, wonderful, heartfelt, humble. And I am just thrilled to have you on Purpose 360. And I wish you so much best wishes to take your vision and that others will, embrace it and that you'll be helping to bring hope and housing and opportunity to so many people. So thank you, Brendan McCluskey.
Carol, thank you so much for the opportunity to put a spotlight on what is this good work that we're all doing together here in Baltimore. And just so you're aware, we are bringing it to elsewhere. We are very intentional about doing this in a way that we're going to share our knowledge to Chicago, to Cincinnati. These are places that have reached out to me already. So once we figure this thing out and we fine tune the engine, we're going to share it.
This podcast was brought to you by some amazing people, and I'd love to thank them. Ann Hundertmark and Kristen Kenny at Carol Cohn on Purpose, Pete Wright and Andy Nelson, our crack production team at True Story FM, and you, our listener. please rate and rank us, because we really want to be as high as possible as one of the top business podcasts available, so that we can continue exploring together the importance and the activation of authentic purpose. Thanks so much for listening.